Welcome to UCC's Global Speaker Series. We're delighted to be joined by UCC alumni and friends who are tuning in from around the world, as well as everyone here who's joined us here on campus tonight. The Global Speaker Series brings together experts from the alumni community with specialists from UCC to discuss topics of contemporary interest and to explore some of the opportunities and challenges facing our world today. We'd like to thank the sponsors of UCC's Global Speaker Series, Deloitte. This evening, we're going to have an in-depth conversation on the benefits and implications arising for both business and society from the fast-paced developments in the field of artificial intelligence. We're delighted to welcome our expert speakers, Conor Twomey and Professor Thia Hennessy, who will be introduced to you shortly by the chair of tonight's discussion, Graham Healy. Graham is a UCC alum and a consulting partner in Deloitte's cloud and engineering practice. In addition to delivering technological advancements for both public and private sector clients, Graham is on the board of the Insight Centre for Data Analytics and UCC's BIS Advisory Board. Welcome, Graham. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks for not calling me out as one of the experts. Certainly I'm not. And firstly, I'd like to start with apologies for bringing everybody inside on one of the nicest days we've had in about 5 years, so that's the first starting point. You're all very welcome. The title of this evening's seminar, if you like, is AI, the Unstoppable Force, Redefining the Future of Business. In Deloitte, we're delighted to continue this collaboration with UCC. And it's one of the other angles we take is we are also one of the sponsors of the Dean Scholars, so delighted to continue the collaboration with UCC in that regard. Let me start by introducing my two experts, panellists. I'll start to my immediate left and Professor Thia Hennessy. Professor Hennessy is a senior experienced leader with a track record of significant achievement in academia and business. She's head of the College of Business and Law at UCC, and prior to this, she was the Dean of the Cork University Business School. She's a highly cited economist with strong quantitative skills and has published numerous articles on economic performance of the agri-food sector and is a regularly invited expert to policy-making bodies such as European Parliament and the OECD. Next to Thia is Conor Twomey, a proud alumni of UCC. I'll start with that, I guess. Yes. Yeah. Conor is co-founder and CEO of AI1, a recently launched technology company based in New York, and we're looking forward to hearing more about that, focused on helping large organizations use artificial intelligence to simplify their operations and make better and faster decisions. Conor studied financial mathematics and actuarial science in UCC and graduated in 2008. And after university, he began his career developing trading strategies and software systems for major global banks. Later, having done all of that work with the banks, I guess, he became the head of AI strategy at a global analytics company. And there he led large teams using AI to improve decision-making across finance, healthcare, energy, and professional sports. Today, at AI1, he works closely with Fortune 500 companies to automate complex tasks, reduce costs, and use their data more efficiently. He's also a frequent speaker at major industry conferences, most recently, I think, Conor, at MIT in the last couple of weeks. So we're delighted to have you back in Ireland to speak to your alma mater, I guess. So without further ado, let's get into the questions. And I guess when we look at the topic of the AI, the unstoppable force, redefining the future of business, maybe Conor, I'll start with you and ask you first, do you agree with the premise? And secondly, if so, that's a headline, right? If so, right? What are the kind of catalysts you're seeing and the market forces you're seeing where AI is playing a major part?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. How is the microphone here for everybody? Doing okay? Great. So based in New York City, so there's definitely going to be a US slant on my perspectives, just to set some context for everybody. I think what we saw in 2023 when ChatGPT emerged was this incredible moment where language was able to be represented by mathematics. And I'm going to try not to be too technical in my talk. So if I start being technical, my dad is going to stick his hand up at the back. So well done, Angus. And so the idea that you could give this mathematical representation of language meant you could do very calculated equations like dog minus puppy plus cat equals kitten. And it was the first time ever that technology could make this sort of equation work for language. And so in 2023, Sam Altman and OpenAI decided to take what's called a transformer model and dump the entire internet into it for a cost of over $100 million. And anybody would have thought, this is a guy literally lighting a dumpster on fire. This is not going to turn out to be anything meaningful or useful. And everyone was surprised. Everyone got caught on the hop. Scientists, leading academics, leading industry professionals, that this thing actually was able to traverse contexts. It was able to give you a response that looked and felt like a human response. And so immediately what people realized was, first off, I can write my wife a poem using ChatGPT. And I think most people probably did that when the technology came out first. In 2024, employers and board members started saying, wait a second, I think this thing is going to be more than just a flash in the pan. And in 2025, what we've seen is the rise of the customer really demanding more of the businesses that they interact with. And so if the product or service you provide as a company cost 100 units of effort in the year 2023, if you are absorbing any of the frontier technology, where it's hardware, software, models, data, without overcomplicating it, if you're absorbing any of the fruits of this innovation, you should be able to provide the same product or service for 85 units today. And so the question the customer is demanding is, what's the plan for the 15 units? Are you making my product or service more reliable? Are you going to give me new features and make me much happier as a client? Are we going to see deflation? Is the price of my product going to actually reduce? Or is it option 3, none of the above? And so the real catalyst for change is existential. I often think of the cartoon, and it's a husband and wife, and they're going into the woods, and the husband and wife, they see a sign that says, careful, bears, and the wife goes down to tie her laces, and the husband says, what are you tying your laces for? You're not going to be able to outrun the bear. She says, I don't need to outrun the bear, I just need to outrun you. And so there's this existential crisis that people see, that they need to start adopting this technology. And there's a fear, and I know we're going to talk about it, that AI is going to take my job. Well, it's not. People who adopt AI are going to take your job. And so there'll be a real call to action, and this will be a recurring theme for the next 48 minutes, 38 minutes. But Graham, yeah, the real catalyst is existential.
Very good. So you're in the Skynet, find Sarah Connors and protect her at all costs type of mentality. Okay, very good. Good to know. So Thia, maybe bring it back to UCC, and I guess obviously you're also your sphere of expertise in the agri-tech business, and talking to Conor's points around the existential threat, but also existential opportunity, if you want to call it that. What are you seeing close to home in UCC and in the industry you're supporting?
Great, thanks very much, Graham. First of all, I have to apologise for the false advertising because I'm not an expert on AI. I'm here as a lay person, I suppose, to share observations, and in the lead up to tonight's event over the weekend, I started panicking a little bit, so I had to do some preparation. So obviously I went to AI to prepare for the AI event. And the more I read, the more I had this uniquely human emotion of self-doubt and imposter syndrome, which AI doesn't suffer from. So at one stage I said, I'm going to ask AI, would Thia Hennessy be a good speaker about AI? So AI said I'd be an excellent speaker. So then I read about AI hallucination, which is when AI gives you wrong answers. So we'll have to judge that one later. I also asked ChatGPT to give me a good joke to use at the opening of an AI event, and I discovered something it's not good at is humor, because the jokes were terrible. And then I asked for a joke in an Irish context, and it was a man walks into a pub, orders a pint of Guinness and sits down to watch the hurling game. And I said the game was the letdown. Nobody would ever say hurling game. So that was my recent experience of AI. But no, to speak to, I suppose, the AI strategy in the university, first of all, maybe. And I suppose we see it across the various pillars of what we're doing here in UCC. From a research perspective, it's really important in that we have our specialists in AI and computer science and business information systems developing new AI tools, but then we also have across all disciplines understanding how AI is shaping our own area of expertise, assisting us in our own research and how it's changing our own fields, whether that's accounting and HRM, my colleagues here this evening, or whether it's agri-tech, for example. UCC is a big, large, complex organisation. We're also grappling with how we can use AI more effectively within our own professional services And I suppose we have a number of use cases at the moment looking at automation, robotic process automation, seeing if we can simplify systems and improve productivity and efficiency of the organization as a whole. And then obviously there's the compliance issues, and I guess we'll talk a little bit more maybe about the EU AI Act and the requirements that that puts on us as an organization to ensure ethical use, to ensure the blocking of prohibited AI. And there's the whole impact of AI on teaching and learning, which is absolutely, I think, game-changing transformation, and the issues it raises both in terms of opportunities, threats, and ethical questions, I think is just really something we're starting to grapple with now.
Thank you. I think a lot of kind of themes coming out there from both of you in terms of workforce, ethics, grappling, right, is a good word, I think, and certainly in our own organisation, we try to take three lenses on it. First of all, what can we use AI to implement within our organisation, how we run and operate our organisation, as you said, Thia, in terms of automation and improving productivity, a lot of back office tasks. Secondly, in terms of how we deliver our services, so using AI as a tool to actually implement our services better. And thirdly, then, the impact AI has on our clients and actually having that lens on it, as well as obviously the workforce that goes with that. But maybe before we get into the kind of, let's say, even some of the geopolitics around the acts and the competitiveness that it can bring, let's maybe talk about the workforce and skilling. And I thought, Conor, you made a really good point at the start around AI is not going to take your jobs, it's the people who adapt and adopt to it. So from your perspective, I guess, if you look at that replacement of jobs, how would you foresee the kind of transition of reskilling people within those AI-focused industries?
Yeah, I think a similar existential crisis emerged around the rise of the personal computer in the 70s and 80s. And there was a dream that we may be making accountants in this world redundant if we had a computer that could take all of the books and records and the month-end ledger and automate it using a spreadsheet. And we've more accountants now than ever, which I think is a travesty. I'm joking. To any accountants in the room, I'm joking. But people would say the same thing. So they're going to the roles that they're going to do is different. The opportunity here is to automate a lot of the mundane, a lot of the pencil pushing through large scale automation. And a lot of that automation is being unlocked by something that sounds scary but really isn't that scary, and it's called agentic AI. And so a show of hands for the room, who has heard of agentic AI as a topic? That's good, about half or so. Brilliant. So the word agentic AI comes from the word agency or autonomy. And so you're giving agency to something to make a decision on your behalf. And so using a real example, you may have a rule that says, I don't meet anyone for coffee after 2 p.m. So that's your rule. You give it to you put it into your Outlook or you hand it to your secretary, and that's your rule forever. What you may change in this agentic world is you may say, I don't meet unimportant people for coffee after 2 p.m. So this word unimportant is subjective. It requires context. It requires a situational awareness to make a judgment call. And when people talk about this scary word agentic, all they're talking about is replacing something that's a rule with something that's a principle. And so as you think about a world that's made of rules, thousands of rules, you think of the bureaucracy that lives within the Irish government, as an example, or any government for that factor. And you think of all of the thousands, tens of thousands of rules that must be obeyed. They can now be replaced by hundreds of well-architected principles that are going to be far more enduring and far more successful from intent to action. And so if people can remember nothing else about agentic AI, it's about going from intent to actually successful action. And so what does that mean in terms of people skilling up and spending time? I see a kind of a crawl, walk, run approach that's, I think, applicable to everybody in every profession of every age. And the first thing is to start using the tools. And so to make sure that you have a safe version of ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude on your mobile phone or on your laptop. And I say the word safe very deliberately. There's an old adage, which is, if you don't know what the product is, you are the product. And so if you're using the free version of any of these tools, a bit like Gmail is free. Gmail take a look at all of your information, and they're using that to target ads at you and other people. And so you need to pay the $20 a month to get access to the tools to do it in a safe way. So start by just using the tools and actually experimenting. And then there's never been a technology shift where there's so much freely available support and education. And so the fascinating thing, Thia, that you were talking about with ChatGPT is you can use ChatGPT to teach you how to use ChatGPT. And so it ends up being the self-feeding process, no matter where you are on the cycle. You can give it the context, and there's a great expression, context is worth 80 IQ points. So you give it a context. Hey, I graduated from medicine in 1973. I'm looking at you, Dad, at the back. I'm a 75-year-old. I've got fantastic grandkids. Yes, I'm oversharing for Dad. Dad's giving me the thumbs up approval here. But when you provide that context in, it comes back to you, and it doesn't say, here's our generic 10-step plan for how people use ChatGPT. It says, okay, Angus, we're going to start off slow. Why don't you try this as the first way to use it? Tell me more about yourself. And so everybody should start using these tools initially just to understand how to interact with them from a prompting perspective.
Thank you. Anything you'd add to that in terms of within the education sector, and any concerns you'd have in terms of either a skilling or the impact it'll have on educating future generations?
Sure. I mean, I think when we look at learning and teaching, there's a number of concerns that we probably all share. I mean, the first is that people become over-reliant on AI, that they lose critical thinking skills themselves, and I think that's the role of us as a university to ensure that's there, that people continue to question the answers they get because they're not always correct. And as you said, it's all about context and prompting, so you do need that basic level of knowledge to interact with it. I think it's very challenging for teaching staff to stay up to date with AI tools as well. And you know, you talked about the reverse mentoring. Often it's the younger generation that are adopting the tools first, so to stay up to date with that. But I think one of our biggest concerns really is protecting academic integrity and assessment. So being sure that students know what they need to know to graduate with a degree is becoming more and more difficult. We've moved away a lot from the kind of in-hall exam assessment that, you know, some of our longer graduated alumni might relate to, and a lot more towards continuous assessment. And I suppose it's just so difficult now to ascertain what's the actual work and thought and idea of the student themselves versus what they have gotten from AI. And, you know, there are different tools to make assessments more AI-proofed, and there's more tools being launched like GPT-0 and that to detect AI. But it is a challenge and it's a concern. And I mean, it's one that will continue and that we have to learn to live with, I think. No more than when, you know, the internet first became available. You could ban the internet and ban people from looking things up, but that's not a very practical approach.
You know, I'll certainly hold my hand up and say I think it was our class brought down the entire network in UCC for playing Quake one day, so the world has come on quite a lot. And actually, what's interesting, I think, when we look at skills in the context of AI, and we've said this over each of the paradigm shifts, whether it was internet, cloud, mobile, digital, and now into AI, is that there's roles that don't exist today that will exist in 10 years. You often see it when, and actually we saw it recently, a client of ours asked for a prompt engineer with 7 years of experience. And like, okay, prompt engineer didn't exist maybe 7 months ago, not to mind say 7 years ago. But just what I'd be interested in maybe is taking it up a level into kind of maybe the more macro, and Conor, we spoke as well beforehand as we, Thia, about I guess it would be good to get your outside-in view of maybe US looking at Europe from a competitiveness point, Conor, in AI, and then Thia, maybe the same from you, and then let's look at the other way around, Europe to US, in the context of ethics, in trust, but also in competitiveness, and just get your sense of where you see each of those kind of dynamics.
Sure, yeah, thanks. So, I mean, I guess with the EU AI Act, the EU have very much taken a precautionary approach. They've prioritised ethics, data privacy, contrasting that to the US approach, which would be much more innovation-driven, I think. And I think as EU citizens, we probably all appreciate the protection that GDPR affords us, but we also probably mostly find it very frustrating. I think what the EU is struggling with in general, and this isn't just in AI, I would see it in my own area of agri-food, is getting the balance between regulation and competitiveness. We've over-regulated in certain areas and we've lost competitiveness. And I think that's what like the Draghi report within the EU has spoken to as well. We've seen it with GDPR, we've seen it with sustainability reporting, which is being rolled back on now. We've seen it in technology and agri-food as well, that we've lost ground to the US and to other countries. So look, I mean, I'm not an expert in this area, but just outside looking in, it feels like that the precautionary approach could hamper our competitiveness, could hold us back. The requirement in organizations to report on the types of AI that are being used, to ban certain AI, to report on the literacy of staff and all of that will be, I suppose, far more demanding than what's facing organizations in the US, would be my interpretation of it.
I think even coast to coast in the US, when I'm on the East Coast in New York City, there's only two things that people care about. Is this going to save me time or is it going to save me money? Privacy, sustainability, be damned. When you go to the West Coast, they're a little bit more eccentric. They care about their data privacy. They do have a moral fibre around the role of AI and the environment. But the view, Thia, is absolutely correct. US businesses, for the first time, are now blacking out Europe from a go-to-market strategy perspective, that it's just not worth the hassle. An international rollout across 30 different countries, having to conform with every single data sovereignty, data compliance, regulation, GDPR, on top of some of the rules that they already have in the US. The juice is not worth the squeeze, as they say in New York City. And so for the first time, people are leapfrogging Europe and going directly to Asia, going directly to the Middle East, where there's arms wide open for AI transformation, AI investment, and deep pockets as well. And so I was lucky enough to speak at an event last summer, and Condoleezza Rice was the headline speaker. So she was like the headline speaker of Glastonbury. I was speaking at the family tent somewhere off to the side. I see Peter Barry in the corner over here. Myself and Peter did a few Glastonbury tours together. But I was speaking at a very small tent, and she spoke about the Cold War that's unspoken of, that is another existential crisis between the US and China to discover artificial general intelligence that is on a magnitude, on a scale as big as the Manhattan Project, the discovery of the nuclear bomb back in the 1940s. And so what you'll see is continuous deregulation in the field of AI. Now you're seeing deregulation occur in the space of data centers, which are seen as a limiting factor to AI success. And going one step further back again, looking at energy and transmission in the US in particular. And so with Canada providing a lot of energy into the US, it'll certainly be an interesting start for Mark Carney to decide what his policies are going to be.
Stepping from AI into geopolitics, that was always nice.
Very smooth.
Exactly. And maybe let's bring it back into the context of business. And maybe just a question for you both. When you look at future AI trends and put on your futurologist or futurist hats, what do you think? Where do you think you see the most profound impacts of AI in business, whether it be by an industry sector or kind of a business domain area? Where do you see as over the next 5-10 years that the biggest impacts are going to take place?
I think when we take a look across the different sectors that we operate with at AI1, so healthcare, insurance, financial services, private equity, I think in health insurance, there's already an existential crisis on margin pressure. And so there's almost this perfect competition between maybe 5 or 10 key providers who all offer some flavor of the same product at roughly the same price, a little bit of brand as a differentiation. And so there's a realization that so much of the activity, if you take a look at United Health or CVS, both have over 250,000 staff. So there's a realization that the first person that can actually deliver the same outcome, the same product or service, but do so with 25,000 staff or 2,500 staff or 25 staff or 2.5 staff, that all of it, you can see where this is going. All of a sudden, they'll be able to turn something that's perfect competition into a monopoly, and the first mover will be the last mover. And so I think about automating a lot of the mundane, a lot of the pin pushing. I think the thing that AI isn't good at, as well as telling terrible jokes, it can't build meaningful relationships, it can't build trust. And the biggest shift for me personally in living and working in the US versus the UK or Ireland is the US, trust is everything. People buy from people they trust. They don't care if it's an inferior product at a superior price. They care about trust. And so that's one thing that AI can't replace. And so I think different sectors have a different level of urgency. I think the ability to automate away a lot of the back office, middle office type of operations is huge. And we'll chat about the future of humanoid robots, I hope, at some point, Graham. So I won't front run that question.
And maybe Thia, from your perspective, maybe in the agri-tech space,
sure.
Obviously there's a lot of, I guess, a lot of opportunity in that area to kind of, whether it be increased yields, weather prediction, whatever. It could be quite grandiose. But any thoughts there?
Yeah,
in terms
and
of
I mean it's right across the supply chain, from soil fertility right through to human health, where there's applications of AI in the agri-food system. And I think what's very exciting is when you look at the challenges facing society, feeding the world's growing population at a lower environmental footprint in a world ravaged by climate change and all of that, you see that the power of AI to do things like reduce food waste. About a third of the food that's produced today is never consumed. And through kind of better decision intelligence planning, you can optimize supply chains, you can manage inventory, you can engage in dynamic pricing, you can put people in touch with food surpluses where they're not used. There's development of smart packaging now, where you have sensors on your fruit and vegetables that give you a more accurate use by date. You can have that linked to your Internet of Things fridge, so you can be prompted, you need to eat your blueberries before tomorrow evening. And you can just see how it can completely transform, for societal good as well, I think. And that's tackling climate change, but equally, data sharing around reducing the carbon footprint and understanding a product from farm right through to human health. And then in terms of wearable devices and fitness tracking and the link to healthcare, it's mind-blowing really, the developments that are happening just in the agri-food sector alone.
And for both of you, sorry, Conor, do you want to come?
I was going to say there's a lot of discussion about the environmental impact of AI, and so I have a few experiments that I tell people to help them understand what happens when they actually ask ChatGPT a question, as an example. So if we walked into a room and there was one 60-watt light bulb in the room, and we asked a Google query, just what time does UCC stay open until? Perfect. The light bulb would stay on. The amount of energy that's consumed to service that query is about 18 seconds of a 60-watt light bulb. Now, if I ask ChatGPT a question, it's the same as the light bulb being turned on for 3 minutes. If I train a model, which happens quite rarely, it's the same as the light bulb being on for 12,000 years. And if I use a reasoning model, which is a more sophisticated way of asking a question, it takes a bit longer, but that's the equivalent of the light bulb being on for 30 minutes. And so people often think about, well, we're literally burning the planet by using this AI. And then on the flip side, you have the promise, this tension between the promise of a utopian future where a third of all food from farm to table doesn't get wasted, where AI can actually improve AI energy efficiency. And so we're still at this inflection point, and it's a constant pressure and tug of war to see at what point does AI begin to support its own ability to offset or negate the bad that it's doing from an environmental perspective. And I think a lot of people are thinking about the role of self-driving cars or autonomous vehicles that rely on the same technology, GPU technology. The humanoid robot is a huge topic that I'm obsessed with. The idea that in probably 2 years' time that you'll have a robot in your kitchen that's using GPUs to figure out what's in your fridge, to come up with a meal that you've decided what your menu looks like for the day, cook it perfectly like Balthazar restaurant in New York or Chapter 1 in Dublin, whatever it might be, and then do all the cleaning afterwards. I don't think that's a million miles away. I think we're probably 2 years away from that as a reality. And so I'm quite excited for what comes next.
Okay, right. So I was going to ask a question on the positive, because it is a constant grapple, as we're all saying, right? There is the existential good, the existential bad. With any technology, new or old, it can be used for good purposes and for not so good purposes. So generally speaking, are you glass half full or glass half empty?
I'm always an optimist. Always an optimist.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yes, but when it comes to AI, I absolutely am. And I think the opportunities are huge. And my wish to everybody in this room is to start using the technology. That it's not as scary as you think. It's not as onerous as you think. And you'll begin to see it's like flexing a new muscle. Like for 60 years, we're used to working with technology, computer science, by putting in a punch card, or the modern version of a punch card, and getting the same answer every time. What's called a deterministic process. Same in, same out. And with this technology around generative AI, it's same in and you get a variant back. And it actually messes your mind up a little bit, this idea of hallucinations. It actually takes practice to understand how to interact with a system that doesn't give you the same answer every single time.
Thia, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an optimist as well, but a realist as well, maybe a little bit concerned about some of the ethical issues. And in particular, I think how AI might exacerbate the inequality we already have in society. I mean, in this room, we're all educated people, we have access to the tools, we can train ourselves how to do it. But like there is a real concern about job displacement and I suppose exacerbating those inequalities of the people who don't have access to reskilling and upskilling and education, and what the future will mean for them, and the rural-urban divide and the US-EU divide. And it's on so many levels, really, I suppose, the inequality. And you talk about the just transition, they talk about that in the context of climate change, but it probably applies in the context of artificial intelligence as well, not to let anybody behind in this new era. And I suppose the other one is, that comes up a lot, is kind of the inbuilt biases in a lot of these algorithms, where they're used for things like recruitment, or not that they're used in UCC for this purpose, but in some universities for screening student applications and all of that. And machine learning can learn biases that humans have had. And I suppose that's a real ethical risk then as well, you know. So
it is, we're innately biased, whether we want to be non-biased or not. And this technology is a reflection of the data and the thought processes that have existed for a long time. And so a very simple example to explain, in vision models, all fire trucks in the northern hemisphere are red. And so you can train your Tesla car to identify if there's a red thing flashing blue, making loads of noise, you should probably pull over. But in Australia, they're yellow. And so they have to retrain models specifically to deal with the fact that they're dealing with different data inputs, different responses. And so the biases is a huge topic. And I'd encourage everyone to read a book called The Alignment Problem. It's a fascinating history on AI, specifically on the models and the biases that are inherent therein.
Maybe I'll kind of taking two themes for the next set of questions. I guess one is around ethics, and then we'll come back to maybe skills, cross-skilling, and some advice in that area. But just in terms of if you were to set policy and you did want to put some, let's call it guardrails on it, or whether they be wide or loose, what were the kind of key tenets that you would look to implement if you were a policy maker at the moment around AI? And also, I guess, do you think some of the, like with the EU AI Act and things like that we've gone too far or not far enough in some cases?
I think the EU AI Act has gone way too far, and I think it's leading to a lack of competitiveness, and that we're seeing that emerge now with businesses starting to skip Europe, as I was talking about. I think if I was setting policies, I think about what are the 10 commandments or 100 commandments of things I never want to happen with this technology, and kind of work back from those. We saw a similar thing happen around cloud computing in 2014, 2015, 2016. And when you spoke to CEOs at that time, they said, under no circumstances will I put my customer information in Jeff Bezos's spare computer. It's just not going to happen, who's the CEO at the time of Amazon. And it took probably a decade for people to realize that their data assets were much safer in AWS, Microsoft, Google, or Oracle than it was in their own server. And so I think what people saw was a 10-year-long transformation journey with 2 years to act. What they're seeing around AI is a 5-year-long transformation journey with about 1 year to act. And so I think a lot of those concerns are going to disappear. And if I was a CEO, I'd start off by what are the 100 things that I would never like to happen with my data, or decisions I'd like to be made. Ultimately, as users of the technology, it's not a defensible argument to say, hey, we declined your mortgage because the robot told me so. As a human, you have to be accountable. And so you need to use this technology, you and the technology working together. And I think that's a really important principle. You can't outsource you can't exonerate yourself of the responsibility and accountability.
Yeah, I'd follow up on that. Yeah, I think the human oversight is really important, and they talk about keeping human decision making in the loop. And there's the loan application, even more serious as smart surgery and things where people's lives are really in the hands of AI decision making tools. But you're hoping that there's a human expert there overseeing that. And I suppose there's the transparency of knowing you're dealing with AI as well as another issue. I think that's within the EU AI Act, and I think it's useful. I mean, we probably don't like ticking all those boxes every time we go on a website, but to know whether you're dealing with AI or not when you're in a particular environment in terms of the accountability. And, the ability to explain how a decision is made as well, so that it's not so much of a black box, so you have access to all of this data and you're running a question and being able to understand how that's been arrived at. So I think they're kind of important principles. And as I said, the kind of not letting anybody behind, the whole job displacement and the inequality piece, I think needs to be a part of any policy as well going forward. And, you know, it'll be a changing landscape. Policy will have to stay up to date and be constantly revised, I think, as the technology develops as well.
And I think that maybe a couple of points to add to that. What's staggering is the amount of investment going in the space, right? And Conor, I think you said a point earlier around, I'm not putting my data in Jeff Bezos' garage or whatever on a spare PC. And I remember talking to a client in a big, I guess, investment management firm, and said, how much are you spending on cyber security? And they said, 200 million a year. And I was like, that's impressive. There's no way I'm going to the cloud. And I said, Microsoft are spending 5 billion a year and have a commitment for another 40 billion in the next 5 years. And I was like, okay, we're moving to the cloud, right? It was very, very quick. And people follow that level of investment. And you said trust is a big point. I guess the key thing, which is interesting, if you look through all of, let's say, these revolutions and evolutions, is the speed of change. And the speed of change within AI, I guess, especially over the last 24 months, has been phenomenal, right? And so maybe taking that into consideration, and you think of, I'm going to ask maybe a two-part question, is people who are already in industry, what are the kind of key skills that they should be looking to cross-skill into? And secondly, do you have any advice, especially I'm sure there's parents in the room and grandparents who are looking at CAO forms and people going to university, and do you think there's any kind of, courses or aptitude or areas that they should be looking at in terms of as a really solid foundation no matter what happens in this period of change?
Yeah, well, as head of the College of Business and Law, I'd have to say business and law they should be looking at. But, no, but seriously, what are the skills? I mean, I think obviously data and digital literacy are really important, and the ability to use these tools, whatever sector or discipline that people are working in, and to be able to complement them with the human skills that can't be replaced, really, the critical thinking, the prompting, the questioning, the human connection, the communication skills, the flexibility. And I think that applies for new graduates, and it applies for people in the workforce as well already to stay up to date with that. I mean, I hear people saying, well, there's no point in doing accounting because machines are going to do all of that in the future. This university's been here for 180 years, and you know, you've said we've even had the calculator over that period, the personal computer, the internet. A core grounding education, you know, in a discipline will always be required, I think, because you'll need to have that critical thinking. You'll have to be able to ask the intelligent question, interpret the answer, and throw it out if it's nonsense. And then I suppose we do see particular new roles emerging. I do think that law and technology and ethics will be a huge growth area. I do think that, you know, in the business school as well, we have business information systems. That's obviously a huge growth area, understanding how to use data systems and how to maximize their value. So look, I'm optimistic, and I understand, you know, like parent myself of kids at that stage, it's difficult, but I think that's always been the case. You know, the workforce is always changing and people are adaptable, and I would just say a decent grounding in any of those disciplines will still be required.
And maybe, Conor, if I could just definitely answer that question, but to maybe adapt when you're probably looking to hire, might be 2,500, might be 2.5 people, right? But what are the kind of the skills or the character traits that you're looking for in the people you're bringing into your organisation?
Yeah, it's as much about IQ as EQ, really, on the hiring front. I think when people have proven a certain amount of analytical, numerical discipline, and it could be from any sort of, doesn't have to be maths or physics or chemistry or biology or engineering, but they've proven themselves that they can figure out numbers quite well, and then they've got a good character, really being empathetic and understanding the needs and knowing when to listen, I think are huge skills. And so to marry that to the original question, I think we're seeing in the US certainly a rising popularity in mixed arts and engineering degrees, where people spend half of their time learning about philosophy and history and other civil matters, and they're spending half of their time then on hardcore numerical analytical skills. So I suppose anyone who's thinking about filling out the CAO in this room, I would suggest don't sweat about what it is you actually study, provided there's some amount of numerical or analytical coursework in there. And just enjoy your time in UCC is the core message.
Always a good plug. maybe just bring it back into actually the business sphere and maybe some practicalities. The impact of AI is certainly a board level topic in a lot of the organisations that we advise and discuss. On a number of fronts, again, educating the board on what it is, what it can be, both in terms of as a catalyst for growth and competitiveness, but also as a kind of in the risk committee of a lot of boards. But just if you were talking to board and you were getting them to take on AI as a concept or as a catalyst, what were the things you'd be advising them in terms of things they should do, and also any of the barriers they may face, or what are prerequisites that they should be considering before going on that journey?
Yeah, I think the way that people talk about AI today is like talking about electricity, like as in it's just assumed it's going to be in everything. It's going to be in this, it's going to be in that machine, that camera. So there's a term called semantic bleaching that I love, and it's when a term is so overused that it loses all meaning. And so in 2024, AI suffered from semantic bleaching. We don't talk about AI at all with our customers. In 2025, that word is agents, and we talked a little bit about agents earlier today, but again, so overused. And so what I think when we sit down with a CEO or with a board, typically we talk about 3 core opportunities for transformation. Large scale automation, so automating the mundane. Enterprise search, so how can you ensure that you don't just have the right data at everyone's fingertips, but it's wrapped with the right context, so that when they're making their decisions, whether they're a surgeon, whether they're a pharmacist, an accountant, that they have every piece of data at their disposal when they make that decision. And then the third area is around AI that generates software. And so what we're seeing is this new field, it's called agentic software engineering. So AI that generates software. The cost of technology is trending to zero very rapidly, and the time to deliver technology is trending to zero very, very rapidly. And so there are things that you can accomplish now that you wouldn't have considered 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. And so the unit economics of the economic viability of specific projects is something that's been massively addressed. So we try not to talk about AI at all, actually.
Very good. And actually, just adding to that, Thia, before you come in, again, talking to a client recently, they said they're trying to get away of looking for use cases for AI and actually saying, well, what are the outcomes I'm trying to achieve? And actually, is AI just an enabler of that, again, at speed or whatever the case may be? But anything in the university or ag-tech context?
Yeah, and I mean, I think our own strategy here, and you see, like, we have a strategic plan for the university, so it's really about how AI can support us in achieving that rather than having an AI strategy as such. And we have a number of use cases in the professional services and in the academic services and in the finance area that we will run through and see how they go to look at further implementation. But I think it's very much about understanding your strategic goals, how AI can support that, and the return on investment as well. It's really, I suppose, like any other strategic development for an organisation. And I think what's important about it as well, and like we would have said this before about sustainability, it needs to be in every part of the organisation for it to be a success. So AI can't be just something that the IT team do. I mean, if there's an AI test case, it needs to be end to end. It needs to have the user in place. It needs to have the people working in that particular area as well as the technical specialists. So I think that's kind of the approach we've been taking, and of course very compliance driven then as a public sector organisation, ensuring we're meeting all of the requirements of the various acts and that as well.
Very good. I'm just conscious of time. Maybe I'll sum up before we open to the floor, before we close the webinar and open to the floor for questions. But maybe just a summary. What's the best, we say, use case or tangible example you've seen where AI has made a difference, either personally or in business, for either of you?
Two calls to action for everybody to try after they've downloaded their favorite tool, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude. One is called reverse prompting. And reverse prompting is where you say, hey, ChatGPT, you're going to play the role of an investigative journalist who's going to answer me questions to help me finish a specific assignment. So in that case, you have all of the information. It's your thoughts. It's your context. ChatGPT is just shaping that and extracting it from you in a way that's authentic. It's yours. It's your personal opinions. But they're going to ask you and bump you questions along the way. So it's not going to do your homework, but it's going to help you be the best version of yourself. So that's one core thing that I kind of compel everybody to do, is that reverse prompting.
Thia, anything?
Yeah, my personal experiences are pretty limited to looking up basic questions online, so I can't share anything too exciting there. I have to say, I do like to watch Black Mirror on Netflix. I don't know if anybody has watched that, but what potentially AI could do in the future is a bit mind-blowing when you watch that kind of, yeah. So, yeah, that's it really.
I'll add one more thing. And so I said there was two things, and I only talked about one, I forgot. The second one is before you actually send an email, if it's a work email, let's say it's a complex political work situation, give it some context and say, rate this email out of 10. And so you don't get it to write the email. You get it to check, like, hey, a second, this is fine, but your tone is actually far too casual for this serious audience. Or you've got a call to action, but you've buried it so deep into your email that nobody's ever going to see it. And so actually using it as a bit of a coach to figure out all about intent to action. How can it help you get to that action you're looking for?
That's certainly how I use it daily, I would say, in terms of just that. Either it acts as an accelerator, helps prompt my thinking, right? We're thinking about long-term succession planning. Well, what are the variables I should be thinking about? And it gives me a starter for 10. Or else I actually come up with them and say, you rated exactly to your point. What else would you add to this? What other considerations would you bring? And it can really go to bouncing back and forth on some of those things. So very, very useful. I'm just conscious of time. First of all, Thia and Conor, thank you very much for your time. I think the answers you gave, the questions may not have been great, but the answers you gave were excellent and very engaging. And we're going to open to the floor, but I think we are going to close the live stream now and going to hand back to Karen first before we do so.
Great, thank you very much, Graham, Thia and Conor, for a really excellent conversation tonight. I think you covered so many themes, and certainly I know I learned a lot, and I think we have a lot to explore and discover from here on. So thank you. I'd also like to thank our online audience for joining us this evening, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon for one of our next Global Speaker Series conversations. Thank you.